Chapter 22. I sing of dead plants and heroic shrubberies, inspiring stuff. Sneaking out of a Roman military camp should not have been so easy. Once we were safely through a hole in the fence, down a trench, through a tunnel, past the pickets and out of sight of the camp's sentry towers, Don was happy to explain how he'd arranged it all. Dude, the place is designed to keep out armies. It's not meant to keep in individual legionnaires or keep out, the occasional well-meaning fawn who's just looking for a hot meal. If you know the patrol schedule and are willing to keep swapping your entry points, it's easy. That seems remarkably industrious for a fawn, I noted. Don grinned. Hey man, slacking is hard work. We've got a long walk, Lavinia said. Best keep moving. I tried not to groan. Another nighttime hike with Lavinia had not been on my evening's agenda, but I had to admit I was curious. What had she and Don been arguing about before? Why had she wanted to talk to me earlier, and where were we going? With her stormy eyes and the black cap over her hair, Lavinia looked troubled and determined, less like a gawky giraffe, more like a tense gazelle. I'd seen her father, Sergei Asimov, perform once with the Moscow Ballet. He'd had that exact expression on his face before launching into a grand jeté. I wanted to ask Lavinia what was going on, but her posture made it clear she was not in the mood for conversation. Not yet, anyway. We hiked in silence out of the valley and down into the streets of Berkeley. Must have been about midnight by the time we got to People's Park. I had not been there since 1969, when I'd stopped by to experience some groovy hippie music and flower power, and instead found myself in the middle of a riot. The police officers' tear gas, shotguns and batons had definitely not been groovy. It had taken all my godly restraint not to reveal my divine form and blast everyone within a 6-mile radius to cinders. Now, decades later, the scruffy park looked like it was still suffering from the aftermath. The worn brown lawn was strewn with piles of discarded clothing and cardboard signs bearing hand-painted slogans like Green Space Not Dorm Space and Save Our Park. Several tree stumps held potted plants and beaded necklaces, like shrines to the fallen. Trash cans overflowed. Homeless people slept on benches or fussed over shopping trolleys full of their worldly belongings. At the far end of the square, occupying a raised plywood stage, was the largest sit-in of dryads and fauns I'd ever seen. It made total sense to me that fauns would inhabit People's Park. They could laze around, beg, eat, leftover food out of the garbage bins, and no one would bat an eye. The dryads were more of a surprise. At least 24 of them were present. Some, I guessed, were the spirits of a local eucalyptus and redwood tree, but most, given their sickly appearances, must have been dryads of the park's long-suffering shrubs, grasses and weeds. Not that I'm judging weed dryads. I've known some very fine crabgrasses. The fauns and dryads sat in a wide circle, as if preparing for a sing-along around an invisible campfire. I got the feeling they were waiting for us, for me, to start the music. I was already nervous enough. Then I spotted a familiar face and nearly jumped out of my zombie-infected skin. Peaches? Meg's demon baby Karpos bared his fangs and responded, Peaches! His tree branch wings had lost a few leaves. His curly green hair was dead brown at the tips, and his lamp-like eyes didn't shine as brightly as I remembered. He must have undergone quite an ordeal tracking us to Northern California, but his growl was still intimidating enough to make me fear for my bladder control. Where have you been? I demanded. Peaches! I felt foolish for asking. Of course he had been Peaches, probably because peaches, peaches and peaches. Does Meg know you're here? How did you... Lavinia gripped my shoulder. Hey, Apollo, time is short. Peaches filled us in on what he saw in Southern California, but he arrived there too late to help. He busted his wings to get up here as fast as he could. He wants you to tell the group firsthand what happened in SoCal. I scanned the faces in the crowd. The nature spirits looked scared, apprehensive and angry, but mostly tired of being angry. I'd seen that look a lot among dryads in these latter days of human civilization. There was only so much pollution your average plant can breathe, drink and get tangled in her branches before starting to lose all hope. Now Lavinia wanted me to break their spirits completely by relating what had happened to their brethren in Los Angeles and what fiery destruction was coming their way tomorrow. In other words, she wanted to get me killed by a mob of angry shrubs. I gulped. Here, this might help. Lavinia slung her backpack off her shoulder. I hadn't paid much attention to how bulky it looked, since she was always tromping around with lots of gear. When she opened it, the last thing I expected her to pull out was my ukulele, newly polished and restrung. How? I asked as she placed it in my hands. I stole it from your room, she said, as if this was obviously what friends did for each other. You were asleep forever. I took it to a buddy of mine who repairs instruments, Marilyn, daughter of Euterpe, the muse of music. I know Euterpe, of course. Her speciality is flutes, not ukuleles. But the action on this fretboard is perfect now. Marilyn must be... I realised I was rambling. Thank you. Lavinia fixed me with her stare, silently commanding me to make her effort worthwhile. She stepped back and joined the circle of nature spirits. I strummed. Lavinia was right. The instrument helped. Not to hide behind. As I discovered, one cannot hide behind a ukulele, but it lent confidence to my voice. After a few mournful minor chords, I began to sing The Fall of Jason Grace, as I had when we first arrived at Camp Jupiter. The song quickly morphed, however. Like all good performers, I adapted the material to my audience. I sang of the wildfires and droughts that had scorched Southern California. I sang of the brave cacti and satyrs from the cistern in Palm Springs who had struggled valiantly to find the source of the destruction. I sang of the dryads, Agave and Moneymaker, both gravely injured in the burning maze, and how Moneymaker had died in the arms of Aloe Vera. I added some hopeful stanzas about Meg and the rebirth of the warrior dryad Malaya, how we'd destroyed the burning maze and given SoulCal's environment at least a fighting chance to heal. But I couldn't hide the dangers that faced us. I described what I had seen in my dreams, the yachts approaching with their fiery mortars, the hellish devastation they would rain upon the entire Bay Area. After strumming my final chord, I looked up. Green tears glistened in the dryad's eyes. Fawns wept openly. Peaches turned to the crowd and growled, "Peaches!" This time I was fairly sure I understood this meaning. "See, I told you so." Don sniffled, wiping his eyes with what looked like a used burrito wrapper. "It's time then. It's true. It's happening. Faunus, protect us." Lavinia dabbed away her own tears. "Thanks, Apollo." As if I'd done her a favour. Why then did I feel like I just kicked each and every one of these nature spirits right in the taproots? I'd spent a lot of time worrying about the fate of New Rome and Camp Jupiter, the oracles, my friends, and myself. But these hackberries and crabgrasses deserved to live just as much. They too were facing death. They were terrified. If the emperors launched their weapons, they stood no chance. The homeless mortals with their shopping trolleys in People's Park would also burn, right along with the legionnaires. Their lives were worth no less. The mortals might not understand the disaster. They'd attribute it to a runaway wildfire or whatever causes their brains could comprehend. But I would know the truth. If this vast, weird, beautiful expanse of the California coast burned, it would be because I'd failed to stop my enemies. "Okay, guys," Lavinia continued, after taking a moment to compose herself. "You heard him. The emperors will be here by tomorrow evening." "But that gives us no time," said a redwood dryad. If they do to the Bay Area what they did to LA." I could feel the fear ripple through the crowd like a cold wind. "The Legion will fight them, though, right?" a fawn asked nervously. I mean, they might win." "Come on, Reginald," a dryad chided. "You want to depend on mortals to protect us? When has that ever worked out?" The others muttered assent. "To be fair," Lavinia cut in, "Frank and Rayner are trying. They're sending a small team of commandos out to intercept the ships, Michael Cahill and a few other hand-picked demigods. But I'm not optimistic." "I hadn't heard anything about that," I said. "How did you find out?" She raised her pink eyebrows like, "Please. And of course Lester here will try to summon godly help with some super secret ritual, but She didn't need to say the rest. She wasn't optimistic about that either. "So what will you do?" I asked. "What can you do?" I didn't mean to sound critical. I just couldn't imagine any options. The Fawn's panicky expression seemed to hint at their game plan. Get bus tickets to Portland, Oregon, immediately. But that wouldn't help the Dryads. They were literally rooted to their native soil. Perhaps they could go into deep hibernation, the way the Dryads in the south had. But would that be enough to enable them to weather a firestorm? I'd heard stories about certain species of plants that germinated and thrived after devastating fires swept across the landscape, but I doubted most had that ability. Honestly, I didn't know much about Dryad life cycles or how they protected themselves from climate disasters. Perhaps if I'd spent more time over the centuries talking to them and less time chasing them. Wow, I really didn't even know myself anymore. "We have a lot to discuss," said one of the Dryads. "Peaches," agreed Peaches. He looked at me with a clear message. "Go away now." I had so many questions for him. Why had he been absent so long? Why was he here and not with Meg? I suspected I wouldn't get any answers tonight. At least nothing beyond snarls, bites and the word peaches. I thought about what the Dryad had said about not trusting mortals to solve nature spirits' problems. Apparently that included me. I had delivered my message, now I was dismissed. My heart was already heavy, and Meg's state of mind was so fragile. I didn't know how I could break the news to her that her diapered little peach demon had become a rogue fruit. "Let's get you back to camp," Lavinia said to me. "You've got a big day tomorrow." We left Dom behind with the other nature spirits, all deep in crisis mode conversation, and retraced our steps down Telegraph Avenue. After a few blocks, I got up the courage to ask, "What will they do?" Lavinia stirred as if she'd forgotten I was there. "You mean, what will we do? 'Cause I'm with them." A lump formed in my throat. "Lavinia, you're scaring me. What are you planning?" "I tried to leave it alone," she muttered. In the glow of the street lamps, the wisps of pink hair that had escaped her cap seemed to float around her head like candy floss. After what we saw in the tomb, Bobby and the others, after you described what we're facing tomorrow. Lavinia, please. I can't fall into line like a good soldier. Me locking shields and marching off to die with everybody else, that's not going to help anybody. But it's best you don't ask. Her growl was almost as intimidating as Peach's, and it's definitely best that you not say anything to anybody about tonight. Now come on. The rest of the way back, she ignored my questions. She seemed to have a dark bubblegum-scented cloud hanging over her head. She got me safely past the sentries, under the wall and back to the coffee shop, before she slipped away into the dark, without even a goodbye. Perhaps I should have stopped her, raised the alarm, got her arrested. But what good would that have done? It seemed to me Lavinia had never been comfortable in the Legion. After all, she spent much of her time looking for secret exits and hidden trails out of the valley. Now she'd finally snapped. I had a sinking feeling that I would never see her again. She'd be on the next bus to Portland with a few dozen fawns, and as much as I wanted to be angry about that, I could only feel sad. In her place, would I have done any different? When I got back to our guest room, Meg had passed out, snoring, her glasses dangling from her fingers, bedsheets waded and wadded around her feet. I tucked her in as best I could. If she was having any bad dreams about her peach spirit friend plotting with the local dryads only a few miles away, I couldn't tell. Tomorrow I'd have to decide what to say to her. Tonight, I'd let her sleep. I crawled into my own bed, sure I'd be tossing and turning until morning. Instead, I passed out immediately. When I woke, the early morning sunlight was in my face. Meg's bed was empty. I realised I'd slept like the dead. No dreams, no visions. That did not comfort me. When the nightmares go silent, that usually means something else is coming, something even worse. I dressed and gathered my supplies, trying not to think about how tired I was, or how much my gut hurt. Then I grabbed a muffin and a coffee from Bombillo and went out to find my friends. Today, one way or another, the fate of New Rome would be decided. Chapter 23. In my pickup truck, with my dogs and my weapons, and this fool Lester. Raina and Meg were waiting for me at the camp's front gates, though I barely recognised the former. In place of her praetor's regalia, she wore blue running shoes and skinny jeans, a long-sleeved copper tee and a maroon cardigan. With her hair pulled back in a braided whip and her face lightly brushed with makeup, she could have passed for one of the many thousands of Bay Area college students that nobody would think twice about. I suppose that was the point. What? She asked me. I realised I'd been staring. Nothing. Meg snorted. She was dressed in her usual green dress, yellow leggings and red high tops, so she could blend in with the many thousands of Bay Area first graders, except for her 12-year-old height, her gardening belt and the pink badge pinned to her collar that displayed a stylised unicorn's head with a crossbones underneath. I wondered if she'd bought it in a New Rome gift shop or somehow got it specially made. Either possibility was unsettling. Raina spread her hands. I do have civilian clothes, Apollo. Even with the mist helping to obscure things, walking through San Francisco in full Legionnaire armour can attract some funny looks. No, you look great. I mean, good. Why were my palms sweating? Can we go now? Raina put 2 fingers in her mouth and let loose a taxicab whistle, so shrill it cleared out my Eustachian tubes. From inside the fort, her 2 metal greyhounds came running, barking like small weapons fire. Oh, good, I said, trying to suppress my panic and run instinct. Your dogs are coming. Raina smirked. Well, they'd get upset if I drove to San Francisco without them. Drove? I was about to say, in what? When I heard a honk from the direction of the city. A battered, bright red Chevy 4x4 rumbled down a road usually reserved for marching legionnaires and elephants. At the wheel was Hazel Levesque, with Frank Zhang riding shotgun. They pulled up next to us. The vehicle had barely stopped moving when Aurum and Argentum leapt into the back of the truck, their metal tongues lolling and tails wagging. Hazel climbed out of the cab. All filled up, Praetor? Thank you, Centurion. Raina smiled. How are the driving lessons coming along? Good, I didn't even run into Terminus this time. Progress, Raina agreed. Frank came around from the passenger's side. Yep, Hazel will be ready for public roads in no time. I had many things to ask. Where did they keep this truck? Was there a petrol station in New Rome? Why had I been walking so much if it was possible to drive? Meg beat me to the real question. Do I get to ride in the back with the dogs? No, ma'am, said Raina. You'll sit in the cab with your seatbelt on. Aw. Meg ran off to pet the dogs. Frank gave Raina a bear hug without turning into a bear. Be careful out there, all right? Raina didn't seem to know what to do with this show of affection. Her arms went stiff. Then she awkwardly patted her fellow praetor on the back. You too, she said. Any word on the strike force? They left before dawn, Frank said. Cahill felt good about it, but he shrugged, as if to say their anti-yacht commando mission was now in the hands of the gods, which as a former god I can tell you was not reassuring. Rayner turned to Hazel. And the zombie pickets? Ready, Hazel said. If Tarquin's hordes come from the same direction as before, they're in for some nasty surprises. I also set traps along the other approaches to the city. Hopefully, we can stop them before they're in hand-to-hand range, so... She hesitated, apparently unwilling to finish her sentence. I thought I understood. So we don't have to see their faces. If the Legion had to confront a wave of undead comrades, it would be much better to destroy them at a distance, without the anguish of having to recognise former friends. I just wish... Hazel shook her head. Well, I still worry Tarquin has something else planned. I should be able to figure it out, but... She tapped her forehead as if she wanted to reset her brain. I could sympathise. You've done plenty, Frank assured her. If they throw surprises at us, we'll adapt. Rayner nodded. OK then, we're off. Don't forget to stock the catapults. Of course, Frank said, and double-check with the quartermaster about those flaming barricades. Of course. And... Rayner stopped herself. You know what you're doing, sorry. Frank grinned. Just bring us whatever we need to summon that godly help. We'll keep the camp in one piece until you get back. Hazel studied Rayner's outfit with concern. Your sword's in the truck. Don't you want to take a shield or something? Nah, I've got my cloak. It'll turn aside most weapons. Rayner brushed the collar of her cardigan. Instantly it unfurled into her usual purple cape. Frank's smile faded. Does my cloak do that? See you guys. Rayner climbed behind the wheel. Wait, does my cloak deflect weapons? Frank called after us. Does mine turn into a cardigan? As we pulled away, I could see Frank Zhang in the rearview mirror, intently studying the stitching of his cape. Our first challenge of the morning, merging onto the Bay Bridge. Getting out of Camp Jupiter had been no problem. A well-hidden dirt road led from the valley up into the hills, eventually depositing us on the residential streets of East Oakland. From there we took Highway 24 until it merged with Interstate 580. Then the real fun began. The morning commuters had apparently not got word that we were on a vital mission to save the greater metropolitan area. They stubbornly refused to get out of our way. Perhaps we should have taken public transport, but I doubted they let killer dog automatons ride the BART trains. Rayner tapped her fingers on the wheel, mumbling along to Tego Calderon lyrics on the truck's ancient CD player. I enjoyed reggaeton as much as the next Greek god, but it was perhaps not the music I would have chosen to soothe my nerves on the morning of a quest. I found it a bit too peppy for my pre-combat jitters. Sitting between us, Meg rummaged through the seeds in her gardener's belt. During our battle in the tomb, she told us lots of packages had opened and got mixed up. Now she was trying to figure out which seeds were which. This meant she would occasionally hold up a seed and stare at it until it burst into its mature form. Dandelion, tomato, aubergine, sunflower. Soon the cab smelled like a garden centre. I had not told Meg about seeing peaches. I wasn't even sure how to start the conversation. How did you know your Karpos is holding clandestine meetings with the fawns and crabgrasses in People's Park? The longer I waited to say something, the harder it became. I told myself it wasn't a good idea to distract Meg during an important quest. I wanted to honour Lavinia's wishes, that I not blab. True, I hadn't seen Lavinia that morning before we left, but maybe her plans weren't as nefarious as I thought. Maybe she wasn't actually halfway to Oregon by now. In reality, I didn't speak because I was a coward. I was afraid to enrage the two dangerous young women I rode with, one of whom could have me ripped apart by a pair of metal greyhounds, while the other could cause cabbages to grow out of my nose. We inched our way across the bridge, Rayner finger-tapping to the beat of El Casabe Sabe. He who knows, knows. I was 75% sure there was no hidden message in Rayner's choice of songs. When we get there, she said, we'll have to park at the base of the hill and hike up. The area around Sutro Tower is restricted. You've decided the tower itself is our target, I said, not Mount Sutro behind it. Can't be sure, obviously, but I double-checked Thalia's list of trouble spots. The tower was on there. I waited for her to elaborate. Thalia's what? Rayner blinked. Didn't I tell you about that? So, Thalia and the Hunters of Artemis, you know, they keep a running list of places where they've seen unusual monstrous activity, stuff they can't quite explain. Sutro Tower is one of them. Thalia sent me her list of locations for the Bay Area so Camp Jupiter can keep an eye on them. How many trouble spots? Meg asked. Can we visit all of them? Rayner nudged her playfully. I like your spirit, killer, but there are dozens in San Francisco alone. I mean the Legion, we tried to keep an eye on them all, but it's a lot, especially recently. With the battles, I thought, and the deaths. I wondered about the small hesitation in Rayner's voice when she said we, and then clarified that she meant the Legion. I wondered what other we's Rayner Avila Ramirez Arellano felt part of. Certainly I had never imagined her in civilian clothes, driving a battered pickup truck, taking her metal greyhounds for a hike, and she'd been in touch with Thalia Grace, my sister's lieutenant, leader of the Hunters of Artemis. I hated the way that made me feel jealous. How do you know Thalia? I tried to sound nonchalant. Judging from Meg's cross-eyed look, I failed miserably. Raina didn't seem to notice. She changed lanes, trying to make headway through the traffic. In the back, Aurum and Argentum barked with joy, thrilling in the adventure. Thalia and I fought Orion together in Puerto Rico, she said. The Amazons and Hunters both lost a lot of good women. That sort of thing. Shared experience, anyway. Yeah, we've kept in touch. How? The communication lines are all down. Letters, she said. Letters? I seem to remember those, back from around the days of vellum and wax seals. You mean when you write something by hand on paper, put it in an envelope and stick a stamp on it? And mail it, right. I mean, it can be weeks or months between letters, but Thalia's a good pen pal. I tried to fathom that. Many descriptions came to mind when I thought about Thalia Grace. Pen pal was not one of them. Where do you even mail the letters to? I asked. The Hunters are constantly on the move. They have a P.O. box in Wyoming and, why are we talking about this? Meg pinched a seed between her fingers. A geranium exploded into bloom. Is that where your dogs went, searching for Thalia? I didn't see how she'd made that connection, but Raina nodded. Just after you arrived, Raina said. I wrote to Thalia about, Jason. I knew it was a long shot that she'd got the message in time, so I sent Aurum and Argentum out looking for her too, in case the Hunters were in the area. No luck. I imagined what could happen if Thalia received Raina's letter. Would she come charging into Camp Jupiter at the head of the Hunters, ready to help us fight the Emperors and Tarquin's undead hordes? Or would she turn her wrath on me? Thalia had already bailed me out of trouble once in Indianapolis. By way of thanks, I got her brother killed in Santa Barbara. I doubted anyone would object if a stray hunter's arrow found me as its target during the fighting. I shivered, thankful for the slowness of the US Postal Service. We made our way past Treasure Island, the anchor of the Bay Bridge midway between Oakland and San Francisco. I thought about Caligula's fleet, which will be passing this island later tonight, ready to unload its troops and, if necessary, its arsenal of Greek firebombs on the unsuspecting East Bay. I cursed the slowness of the US Postal Service. So, I said, making a second attempt at nonchalance, are you and, Thalia, Raina raised an eyebrow. Involved romantically? Well, oh, very smooth, Apollo. Have I mentioned I was once the god of poetry? Raina rolled her eyes. If I had a denarius for every time I got asked that question, aside from the fact that Thalia is in the Hunters and thus sworn to celibacy, why does a strong friendship always have to progress to romance? Thalia's an excellent friend. Why would I risk messing that up? That was a rhetorical question, Raina added. I do not need a response. I know what rhetorical means. I made a mental note to double-check the word's definition with Socrates the next time I was in Greece. Then I remembered Socrates was dead. I only thought... I love this song, Meg interrupted. Turn it up. I doubted Meg had the slightest interest in Tego Calderon, but her intervention may have saved my life. Raina cranked up the volume, thus ending my attempt at death by casual conversation. We stayed silent the rest of the way into the city, listening to Tego Calderon singing Punto y Aparte, and Raina's greyhounds jubilantly barking like semi-automatic clips discharged on New Year's Eve. Chapter 24. Stick my godly face where it doesn't belong and Venus, I hate you. For such a populated area, San Francisco had a surprising number of wilderness pockets. We parked on a dead-end road at the base of the Towers Hill. To our right, a field of rocks and weeds offered a multi-million-dollar view of the city. To our left, the incline was so heavily forested, you could almost see the eucalyptus trunks as climbing rungs. From the hill's summit, perhaps a quarter of a mile above us, Sutro Tower soared into the fog, its red and white pylons and crossbeams forming a giant tripod that reminded me uncomfortably of the Delphic oracle's seat, or the scaffolding for a funeral pyre. There's a relay station at the base, Raina pointed towards the hilltop. We may have to deal with mortal guards, fences, barbed wire, that kind of thing, plus whatever Tarquin might have waiting for us. Neat, Meg said. Let's go. The greyhounds needed no encouragement. They charged uphill, ploughing through the undergrowth. Meg followed, clearly determined to rip her clothes on as many brambles and thorn bushes as possible. Raina must have noticed my pained expression as I contemplated the climb. Don't worry, she said. We can take it slow. Aurum and Argentum know to wait for me at the top. But does Meg? I imagined my young friend charging a load into a relay station filled with guards, zombies, and other neat surprises. Good point, Raina said. Let's take it medium, then. I did my best, which entailed lots of wheezing, sweating, and leaning against trees to rest. My archery skills may have improved, my music was getting better, but my stamina was still 100% Leicester. At least Raina didn't ask me how my wound felt. The answer was somewhere south of horrible. When I'd got dressed that morning, I'd avoided looking at my gut, but I couldn't ignore the throbbing pain or the deep purple tendrils of infection now licking at the bases of my wrists and my neck, which not even my long-sleeved hoodie could hide. Occasionally my vision blurred, turning the world a sickly shade of aubergine. I could hear a distant whisper in my head, the voice of Tarquin beckoning me to return to his tomb. So far the voice was just an annoyance, but I had the feeling it would get stronger until I could no longer ignore it, or fail to obey it. I told myself I just needed to hang in there until tonight. Then I could summon godly help and get myself cured, or I'd die in battle. At this point, either option was preferable to a painful, lingering slide into undeath. Raina walked alongside me, using her sheathed sword to poke the ground as if she expected to find landmines. Ahead of us, though, through the dense foliage, I saw no sign of Meg or the greyhounds, but I could hear them rustling through leaves and stepping on twigs. If any sentries waited for us at the summit, we would not be taking them by surprise. So, Raina said, apparently satisfied that Meg was out of earshot. Are you going to tell me? My pulse accelerated to a tempo suitable for a parade march. Tell you what? She raised her eyebrows like, really? Ever since you showed up at camp, you've been acting jumpy. You stare at me like I'm the one who got infected. Then you won't make eye contact. You stammer, you fidget. I do notice these things. Ah. I climbed a few more steps. Perhaps if I concentrated on the hike, Raina would let the matter drop. Look, she said, I'm not going to bite you. Whatever is going on, I'd rather not have it hanging over your head, or mine, when we go into battle. I swallowed, wishing I had some of Lavinia's bubblegum to cut the taste of poison and fear. Raina made a good point. Whether I died today or turned into a zombie or somehow managed to live, I would rather face my fate with my conscience clear and no secrets. For one thing, I should tell Meg about my encounter with Peaches. I should also tell her I didn't hate her. In fact, I liked her pretty well. All right, I loved her. She was the bratty little sister I'd never had. As for Raina, I didn't know whether I was or wasn't the answer to her destiny. Venus might curse me for levelling with the Praetor, but I had to tell Raina what was bothering me. I was unlikely to get another chance. It's about Venus, I said. Raina's expression hardened. It was her turn to stare at the hillside and hope the conversation went away. I see. She told me her little prediction. Raina spat out the words like inedible seeds. No mortal or demigod will ever heal my heart. I didn't mean to pry, I promised. It's just... Oh, I believe you. Venus loves her gossip. I doubt there's anyone at Camp Jupiter who doesn't know what she told me in Charleston. Really? Raina broke a dry branch off a shrub and flicked it into the undergrowth. I went on that quest with Jason, 2 years ago. Venus took one look at me and decided, I don't know, I was broken. I needed romantic healing, whatever. I wasn't back at camp a full day before the whispering started. Nobody would admit that they knew, but they knew. The looks I got, oh, poor Raina, the innocent suggestions about who I should date. She didn't sound angry. It was more like weighed down and weary. I remembered Frank Zhang's concern about how long Raina had shouldered the burdens of leadership, how he wished he could do more to relieve her. Apparently a lot of legionnaires wanted to help Raina. Not all of that help had been welcome or useful. The thing is, she continued, I'm not broken. Of course not. So why have you been acting nervous? What does Venus have to do with it? Please don't tell me it's pity. No, nothing like that. Up ahead, I heard Meg romping through the brush. Occasionally she would say, Hey, how's it going? In a conversational tone, as if passing an acquaintance on the street. I suppose she was talking to the local dryads. Either that or the theoretical guards we were looking out for were very bad at their jobs. You see, I fumbled for words. Back when I was a god, Venus gave me a warning. About you. Aurum and Argentum burst through the bushes to check on Mum, their toothy smiles gleaming like freshly polished bear traps. Oh good, I had an audience. Raina patted Aurum absently on the head. Go on, Lester. The marching band in my bloodstream was now doing double-time manoeuvres. Well, I walked into the throne room one day and Venus was studying this hologram of you, and I asked, just completely casually, mind you, who's that? And she told me your fate, I guess. The thing about healing your heart. Then she just tore into me. She forbade me to approach you. She said if I ever tried to woo you, she would curse me forever. It was totally unnecessary and also embarrassing. Raina's expression remained as smooth and hard as marble. Woo? Is that even a thing anymore? Do people still woo? I I don't know, but I stayed away from you. You'll notice I stayed away. Not that I would have done otherwise without the warning. I didn't even know who you were. She stepped over a fallen log and offered me a hand, which I declined. I didn't like the way her greyhounds were grinning at me. So, in other words, she said, what, you're worried Venus will strike you dead because you're invading my personal space? I really wouldn't worry about that, Lester. You're not a god anymore. You're obviously not trying to woo me. We're comrades on a quest. She had to hit me where it hurt, right in the truth. Yes, I said, but I was thinking, why was this so hard? I had spoken of love to women before, and men, and gods, and nymphs, and the occasional attractive statue before I realised it was a statue. Why, then, were the veins of my neck threatening to explode? I thought if it would help, I continued, perhaps it was destiny that... Well, you see, I'm not a god anymore, as you said, and Venus was quite specific that I shouldn't stick my godly face anywhere near you. But Venus, I mean, her plans are always twisting and turning. She may have been practicing reverse psychology, so to speak. If we were meant to, I could help you. Raina stopped. Her dogs tilted their metal heads towards her, perhaps trying to gauge their master's mood. Then they regarded me, their jewelled eyes cold and accusatory. Lester, Raina sighed, what in Tartarus are you saying? I'm not in the mood for riddles. That maybe I'm the answer, I blurted. To healing your heart, I could, be your boyfriend. As Lester, if you wanted, you and me, yeah? I was absolutely certain that up on Mount Olympus, the other Olympians all had their phones out and were filming me to post on Utepe Tube. Raina stared at me long enough for the marching band in my circulatory system to play a complete stanza of You're a Grand Old Flag. Her eyes were dark and dangerous. Her expression was unreadable, like the outer surface of an explosive device. She was going to murder me. No, she would order her dogs to murder me. By the time Meg rushed to my aid, it would be too late. Of course, or worse, Meg would help Raina bury my remains, and no one would be the wiser. When they returned to camp, the Romans would ask, what happened to Apollo? Who? Raina would say. Oh, that guy. Dunno, we lost him. Oh, well, the Romans would reply, and that would be that. Raina's mouth tightened into a grimace. She bent over, gripping her knees. Her body began to shake. Oh, gods, what had I done? Perhaps I should comfort her, hold her in my arms. Perhaps I should run for my life. Why was I so bad at romance? Raina made a squeaking sound, then a sort of sustained whimper. I really had hurt her. Then she straightened, tears streaming down her face, and burst into laughter. The sound reminded me of water rushing over a riverbed that had been dry for ages. Once she started, she couldn't seem to stop. She doubled over, stood upright again, leaned against a tree and looked at her dogs as if to share the joke. Oh, my gods, she wheezed. She managed to restrain her mirth long enough to blink at me through the tears, as if to make sure I was really there and she'd heard me correctly. You! Me! Aurum and Argentum seemed just as confused as I was. They glanced at each other, then at me, as if to say, what have you done to our mum? If you broke her, we will kill you. Raina's daughter, her laughter rolled across the hillside. Once I got over my initial shock, my ears began to burn. Over the last few months I had experienced quite a few humiliations, but being laughed at to my face when I wasn't trying to be funny, that was a new low. I don't see why... I wasn't saying that. Stop, please. You're killing me. She doesn't mean that literally, I yelped for the dog's benefit. And you thought... Raina didn't seem to know where to point. At me, herself, the sky? Seriously? Wait, my dogs would have attacked if you were lying. Oh, wow. Ha ha! So that's a no then, I huffed. Fine, I get it. You can stop. Her laughter turned to asthmatic squeaking as she wiped her eyes. Apollo, when you were a god, she struggled for breath, like with your powers and good looks and whatever. Say no more. Naturally, you would have... That would have been a solid, absolute hard pass no. I gaped. I'm astonished. And as Lester, I mean, you're sweet and kind and adorkable at times. Adorkable at times. But wow, still a big time no. A lesser mortal would have crumbled to dust on the spot, their self-esteem is imploding. In that moment, as she rejected me utterly, Raina had never seemed more beautiful and desirable. Funny how that works. Meg emerged from the hackberry bushes. Guys, there's nobody up there, but... She froze, taking in the scene, then glancing at the greyhounds for explanation. Don't ask us, their metal faces seemed to say. Mum is never like this. What's so funny? Meg asked. A smile tugged at her mouth, as if she wanted to join the joke, which was, of course, me. Nothing, Raina told, holding her breath for a moment, then lost it again in a fit of giggles. Raina Avila Ramirez Arellano, daughter of Bologna, feared praetor of the 12th Legion, giggling. At last she seemed to regain some of her self-control. Her eyes danced with humour. Her cheeks glowed beet red. Her smile made her seem like a different person. A happy different person. "Thanks, Lester," she said. "I needed that. Now let's go find the soundless god, shall we?" She led the way up the hill, holding her ribs as if her chest still hurt from too much hilarity. Then and there I decided that if I ever became a god again, I would rearrange the order of my vengeance list. Venus had just moved up to the top spot. Chapter 25. Frozen in terror, like a god in the headlights. Why are you speeding up? Mortal security was not a problem. There wasn't any. Across a flat expanse of rocks and weeds, the relay station sat nestled at the base of Sutro Tower. The blocky brown building had clusters of white satellite dishes dotting its roof like toadstools after a rain shower. The doors stood wide open. The windows were dark. The parking area at the front was empty. "This isn't right," Raina murmured. "Didn't Tarquin say they were doubling security?" "Doubling the flock," Meg corrected, "but I don't see any sheep or anything." That idea made me shudder. Over the millennia, I'd seen quite a few flocks of guardian sheep. They tended to be poisonous and or carnivorous, and they smelled like mildeweed sweaters. "Apollo, any thoughts?" Raina asked. At least she could look at me now without bursting into laughter, but I didn't trust myself to speak. I just shook my head helplessly. I was good at that. "Maybe we're in the wrong place," Meg asked. Raina bit her lower lip. "Something's definitely off here. Let me check inside the station. Aurum and Argentum can make a quick search. If we encounter any mortals, I'll just say I was hiking and got lost. You guys wait here. Guard my exit. If you hear barking, that means trouble." She jogged across the field, Aurum and Argentum at her heels, and disappeared inside the building. Meg peered at me over the top of her cat-eye glasses. "How come you made her laugh?" "That wasn't my intention. Besides, it isn't illegal to make someone laugh. You asked her to be your girlfriend, didn't you?" What? No, sort of. Yes. That was stupid. I found it humiliating to have my love life criticised by a little girl wearing a unicorn and crossbones badge. You wouldn't understand. Meg snorted. I seemed to be everyone's source of amusement today. I studied the tower that loomed above us. Up the side of the nearest support column, a steel-ribbed chute enclosed a row of rungs, forming a tunnel that one could climb through, if one was crazy enough to reach the first set of crossbeams, which bristled with more satellite dishes and cellular antennae fungi. From there, the rungs continued upward into a low-lying blanket of fog that swallowed the tower's top half. In the white mist, a hazy black V floated in and out of sight, a bird of some sort. I shivered, thinking of the Strixes that had attacked us in the burning maze. But Strixes only hunted at night time. That dark shape had to be something else, maybe a hawk looking for mice. The law of averages dictated that once in a while I'd have to come across a creature that didn't want to kill me, right? Nevertheless, the fleeting shape filled me with dread. It reminded me of the many near-death experiences I'd shared with Meg McCaffrey, and of the promise I'd made to myself to be honest with her, back in the good old days of 10 minutes ago, before Raina had nuked my self-esteem. "Meg," I said, "last night, you saw Peaches, I know." She might have been talking about the weather. Her gaze stayed fixed on the doorway of the relay station. "You know," I repeated. "He's been around for a couple of days." "You've seen him?" "Just sensed him. He's got his reasons for staying away. Doesn't like the Romans. He's working on a plan to help the local nature spirits." "And if that plan is to help them run away?" In the diffused grey light of the fog bank, Meg's glasses looked like her own tiny satellite dishes. "You think that's what he wants? Or what the nature spirits want?" I remembered the faun's fearful expressions at People's Park, the Dryad's weary anger. "I don't know, but Lavinia, yeah, she's with them." Meg shrugged one shoulder. "The Centurions noticed her missing at morning roll call. They're trying to downplay it. Bad for morale." I stared at my young companion, who had apparently been taking lessons from Lavinia in advanced camp gossip. "Does Raina know?" "That Lavinia is gone?" "Sure. Where Lavinia went? Nah. I don't either, really. Whatever she and Peaches and the rest are planning, there's not much we can do about it now. We've got other stuff to worry about." I crossed my arms. "Well, I'm glad we had this talk, so I could unburden myself of all the things you already knew. I was also going to say that you're important to me, and I might even love you like a sister, but I already know that too." She gave me a crooked grin, offering proof that Nero really should have taken her to the orthodontist when she was younger. "It's okay. You've got less annoying too." Look, here comes Raina." And so ended our warm family moment as the praetor re-emerged from the station, her expression unsettled, her greyhounds happily circling her legs as if waiting for jelly beans. "The place is empty," Rayner announced. "Looks like everybody left in a hurry. I'd say something cleared them out, like a bomb threat maybe." I frowned. "In that case, wouldn't there be emergency vehicles here?" "The mist," Meg guessed, "could have made the mortals see anything to get them out of here. Clearing the scene before—" I was about to ask, before what? But I didn't want the answer. Meg was right, of course. The mist was a strange force. Sometimes it manipulated mortal minds after a supernatural event, like damage control. Other times it operated in advance of a catastrophe, pushing away mortals who might otherwise wind up as collateral damage, like ripples in a local pond, warning of a dragon's first footstep. "Well," Rayner said, "if that's true, it means we're in the right place, and I can only think of one other direction to explore." Her eyes followed the pylons of Sutro Tower until they disappeared into the fog. "Who wants to climb first?" Want had nothing to do with it. I was drafted. The ostensible reason was so Rayner could steady me if I started feeling shaky on the ladder. The real reason was probably so I couldn't back out if I got scared. Meg went last, I suppose because that would give her time to select the proper gardening seeds to throw at our enemies while they were mauling my face and Rayner was pushing me forward. Aurum and Argentum, not being able to climb, stayed on the ground to guard our exit, like the opposable thumb-lacking slackers they were. If we ended up plummeting to our deaths, the dogs would be right there to bark excitedly at our corpses. That gave me great comfort. The rungs were slippery and cold. The chute's metal ribs made me feel like I was crawling through a giant slinky. I imagined that they were meant as some kind of safety feature, but they did nothing to reassure me. If I slipped, they would just be more painful things for me to hit on my way down. After a few minutes, my limbs were shaking. My fingers trembled. The first set of crossbeams seemed to be getting no closer. I looked down and saw we had barely cleared the radar dishes on the station's rooftop. The cold wind buffeted me around the cage, ripping through my hoodie, rattling the arrows in my quiver. Whatever Tarquin's guards were, if they caught me on this ladder, my bow and my ukulele would do me no good. At least a flock of killer sheep couldn't climb ladders. Meanwhile, in the fog high above us, more dark shapes swirled. Definitely birds of some kind. I reminded myself that they couldn't be Strixes. Still, a queasy sense of danger gnawed at my stomach. What if? "Stop it, Apollo," I chided myself. "There's nothing you can do now but keep climbing." I concentrated on one perilous slippery rung at a time. The soles of my shoes squeaked against the metal. Below me, Meg asked, "Do you guys smell roses?" I wondered if she was trying to make me laugh. Roses? Why in the name of the 12 gods would I smell roses up here? Rayner said, "All I smell is Lester's shoes. I think he stepped in something." "A large puddle of shame," I muttered. "I smell roses," Meg insisted. "Whatever, keep moving." I did, since I had no choice. At last we reached the first step of crossbeams. A catwalk ran the length of the girders, allowing us to stand and rest for a few minutes. We were only about 60 feet above the relay station, but it felt much higher. Below us spread an endless grid of city blocks, rumpling and twisting across the hills whenever necessary. The streets, making designs that reminded me of the Thai alphabet. The goddess Nang Quack had tried to teach me their language once, over a lovely dinner of spicy noodles, but I was hopeless at it. Down in the parking lot, Aurum and Argentum looked up at us and wagged their tails. They seemed to be waiting for us to do something. The mean-spirited part of me wanted to shoot an arrow at the top of the next hill and yell, "Fetch!" But I doubted Rayner would appreciate that. "It's fun up here," Meg decided. She did a cartwheel because she enjoyed giving me heart palpitations. I scanned the triangle of catwalks, hoping to see something besides cables, circuit boxes and satellite equipment, preferably something labelled, "Push this button to complete quest and collect reward." Of course not. I grumbled to myself. Tarquin wouldn't be so kind as to put whatever we needed on the lowest level. "Definitely no silent gods here," Rayner said. "Thanks a lot." She smiled, clearly still in a good mood from my earlier misstep into the puddle of shame. "I also don't see any doors. Didn't the prophecy say I'm supposed to open a door?" "Could be a metaphorical one," I speculated. "But you're right, there's nothing here for us." Meg pointed to the next level of crossbeams, another 60 feet up, barely visible in the belly of the fog bank. "The smell of roses is stronger from up there," she said. "We should keep climbing." I sniffed the air. I smelled only the faint scent of eucalyptus from the woods below us, my own sweat cooling against my skin, and the sour whiff of antiseptic and infection rising from my bandaged abdomen. "Hooray," I said. "More climbing." This time Rayner took the lead. There was no climbing cage going to the second level, just bare metal rungs against the side of the girder, as if the builders had decided, well, if you made it this far, you must be crazy, so no more safety features. Now that the metal-ribbed chute was gone, I realised it had given me some psychological comfort. At least I could pretend I was inside a safe structure, not free climbing a giant tower like a lunatic. It made no sense to me that Tarquin would put something as important as his silent god at the top of a radio tower, or that he had allied himself with the emperors in the first place, or that the smell of roses might signal that we were getting closer to our goal, or that those dark birds kept circling above us in the fog. Weren't they cold? Didn't they have jobs? Still, I had no doubt we were meant to climb this monstrous tripod. It felt right, by which I mean it felt terrifying and wrong. I had a premonition that everything would make sense to me soon enough, and when it did, I wouldn't like it. It was as if I was standing in the dark, staring at a small disconnected light in the distance, wondering what they might be. By the time I realised, oh hey, those are the headlights of a large truck barrelling towards me, it would be too late. We were halfway to the second set of crossbeams when an angry shadow dived out of the fog, plummeting past my shoulder. The gust from its wings nearly knocked me off the ladder. Whoa! Meg grabbed my left ankle, though that did nothing to steady me. What was that? I caught a glimpse of the bird as it disappeared back into the fog. Oily black wings, black beak, black eyes. A sob built in my throat as one of the proverbial truck's headlights became very clear to me. A raven. A raven. Raina frowned down at me. That thing was huge. True, the creature that buzzed me must have had a wingspan of at least 20 feet, but then several angry croaks sounded from somewhere in the mist, leaving me in no doubt. Ravens. Plural, I corrected. Giant ravens. Half a dozen spiralled into view, their hungry black eyes dancing over us like targeting lasers, assessing our soft and tasty weak spots. A flock of ravens. Meg sounded half incredulous, half fascinated. Those are the guards. They're pretty. I groaned, wishing I could be anywhere else, like in bed, under a thick layer of warm Kevlar quilts. I was tempted to protest that a group of ravens was actually called on an unkindness or a conspiracy. I wanted to shout that Tarquin's guards should be disqualified on that technicality, but I doubted Tarquin cared about such niceties. I knew the ravens didn't. They would kill us either way, no matter how pretty Meg thought they were. Besides, calling ravens unkind and conspiratorial had always seemed redundant to me. They're here because of Coronus, I said miserably. This is my fault. Who's Coronus? Raina demanded. Long story. I yelled at the birds. Guys, I've apologised 1,000,000 times. The ravens croaked back angrily. A dozen more dropped out of the fog and began to circle us. They'll tear us apart, I said. We have to retreat. Back to the first platform. The second platform is closer, Raina said. Keep climbing. Maybe they're just checking us out, Meg said. Maybe they won't attack. She shouldn't have said that. Ravens are contrary creatures. I should know. I shaped them into what they are. As soon as Meg expressed the hope that they wouldn't attack, they did. Chapter 26. I'd like to sing a classic for you now. Thank you. Please stop stabbing me. In retrospect, I should have given ravens sponges for beaks. Nice, soft, squishy sponges that weren't capable of stabbing. While I was at it, I should have thrown in some Nerf claws. But no, I let them have beaks like serrated knives and claws like meat hooks. What had I been thinking? Meg yelled as one of the birds dived by her, raking her arm. Another flew at Raina's legs. The praetor levelled a kick at it, but her heel missed the bird and connected with my nose. Ow! I yelled, my whole face throbbing. My bad. Raina tried to climb, but the birds swirled around us, stabbing and clawing and tearing away bits of our clothes. The frenzy reminded me of my farewell concert in Thessalonica, back in 235 BCE. I like to do a farewell tour every 10 years or so, just to keep the fans guessing. Dionysus had shown up with his entire horde of souvenir-hunting maenads. Not a good memory. Lester, who is Coronus? Raina shouted, drawing her sword. Why are you apologising to the birds? I created them. My busted nose made me sound like I was gargling syrup. The ravens cawed in outrage. One swooped, its claws narrowly missing my left eye. Raina swung her sword wildly, trying to keep the flock at bay. Well, can you uncreate them? Meg asked. The ravens didn't like that idea. One dived at Meg. She tossed it a seed, which, being a raven, it instinctively snapped out of the air. A pumpkin exploded to full growth in its beak. The raven, suddenly top-heavy with a mouthful of Halloween, plummeted towards the ground. Okay, I didn't exactly create them, I confessed. I just changed them into what they are now, and no, I can't undo it. More angry cries from the birds, though for the moment they stayed away, wary of the girl with the sword and the other one with the tasty exploding seeds. Tarquin had chosen the perfect guards to keep me from his silent god. Ravens hated me. They probably worked for free, without even a health plan, just hoping to have the chance to bring me down. I suspected the only reason we were still alive was that the birds were trying to decide who got the honour of the kill. Each angry croak was a claim to my tasty bits. I get his liver. No, I get his liver. Well, I get his kidneys then. Ravens are as greedy as they are contrary. Alas, we couldn't count on them arguing with one another for long. We'd be dead as soon as they figured out their proper pecking order. Oh, maybe that's why they call it a pecking order. Raina took a swipe at one that was getting too close. She glanced at the catwalk on the crossbeam above us, perhaps calculating whether she'd have time to reach it if she sheathed her sword. Judging from her frustrated expression, her conclusion was no. Lester, I need intel, she said. Tell me how we defeat these things. I don't know, I wailed. Look, back in the old days, ravens used to be gentle and white like doves, okay? But they were terrible gossips. One time I was dating this girl, Coronis. The ravens found out she was cheating on me, and they told me about it. I was so angry I got Artemis to kill Coronis for me. Then I punished the ravens for being tattletales by turning them black. Raina stared at me like she was contemplating another kick to my nose. That story is messed up on so many levels. Just wrong, Meg agreed. You had your sister kill a girl who was cheating on you. Well, Then you punished the birds that told you about it, Raina added, by turning them black, as if black was bad and white was good. When you put it that way, it doesn't sound right, I protested. It's just what happened when my curse scorched them. It also made them nasty-tempered flesh-eaters. Oh, that's much better, Raina snarled. If we let the birds eat you, Meg asked, will they leave Raina and me alone? What? I worried that Meg might not be kidding. Her facial expression did not say kidding. It said serious about the birds eating you. Listen, I was angry. Yes, I took it out on the birds. But after a few centuries, I cooled down. I apologized. By then, they kind of liked being nasty-tempered flesh-eaters. As for Coronis, at least I saved the child she was pregnant with when Artemis killed her. He became Asclepius, god of medicine. Your girlfriend was pregnant when you had her killed. Raina launched another kick at my face. I managed to dodge it, since I'd had a lot of practice cowering, but it hurt to know that this time she hadn't been aiming at an incoming raven. Oh no, she wanted to knock my teeth in. You suck, Meg agreed. Can we talk about this later? I pleaded, or perhaps never? I was a god then. I didn't know what I was doing. A few months ago, a statement like that would have made no sense to me. Now it seemed true. I felt as if Meg had given me her thick-lensed rhinestone-studded glasses, and to my horror, they corrected my eyesight. I didn't like how small and tawdry and petty everything looked, rendered in perfect ugly clarity through the magic of Megovision. Best, most of all, I didn't like the way I looked. Not just present-day Lester, but the god formerly known as Apollo. Raina exchanged glances with Meg. They seemed to reach a silent agreement that the most practical course of action would be to survive the ravens now, so they could kill me themselves later. We're dead if we stay here. Raina swung her sword at another enthusiastic flesh-eater. We can't fend them off and climb at the same time. Ideas? The ravens had one. It was called all-out attack. They swarmed, pecking, scratching, croaking with rage. I'm sorry, I screamed, swatting futilely at the birds. I'm sorry. The ravens did not accept my apology. Claws ripped my trouser legs. A beak clamped onto my quiver and almost pulled me off the ladder, leaving my feet dangling for a terrifying moment. Raina continued to slash away. Meg cursed and threw seeds like party favours from the worst parade float ever. A giant raven spiralled out of control, covered in daffodils. Another fell like a stone, its stomach bulging in the shape of a butternut squash. My grip weakened on the rungs. Blood dripped from my nose, but I couldn't spare a moment to wipe it away. Raina was right. If we didn't move, we were dead, and we couldn't move. I scanned the crossbeam above us. If we could just reach it, we'd be able to stand and use our arms. We'd have a fighting chance to, fight. At the far end of the catwalk, abutting the next support pylon, stood a large rectangular box like a shipping container. I was surprised I hadn't noticed it sooner, but compared to the scale of the tower, the container seemed small and insignificant, just another wedge of red metal. I had no idea what such a box was doing up here. A maintenance depot? A storage shed? But if we could find a way inside, it might offer us shelter. Over there, I yelled. Raina followed my gaze. If we can reach it, we need to buy time. Apollo, what repels ravens? Isn't there something they hate? Worse than me? They don't like daffodils much, Meg observed, as another flower-festooned bird went into a tailspin. We need something to drive them all away, Raina said, swinging her sword again. Something they'll hate worse than Apollo. Her eyes lit up. Apollo? Sing for them. She might as well have kicked me in the face again. My voice isn't that bad. But you used to be the god of music, right? If you can charm a crowd, you should be able to repulse one. Pick a song these birds will hate. Great. Not only had Raina laughed in my face and busted my nose, now I was her go-to guy for repulsiveness. Still, I was struck by the way she said I used to be a god. She didn't seem to mean it as an insult. She said it almost like a concession, like she knew what a horrible deity I had been, but held out hope that I might be capable of being someone better, more helpful, maybe even worthy of forgiveness. Okay, I said. Okay, let me think. The ravens had no intention of letting me do that. They cawed and swarmed in a flurry of black feathers and pointy talons. Raina and Meg tried their best to drive them back, but they couldn't cover me completely. A beak stabbed me in the neck, narrowly missing my carotid artery. Claws raked the side of my face, no doubt giving me some bloody new racing stripes. I couldn't think about the pain. I wanted to sing for Raina, to prove that I had indeed changed. I was no longer the god who'd had Coronis killed and created ravens, or cursed the Cumaean Sibyl, or done any of the other selfish things that had once given me no more pause than choosing what dessert toppings I wanted on my ambrosia. It was time to be helpful. I needed to be repulsive for my friends. I rifled through millennia of performance memories, trying to recall any of my musical numbers that had totally bombed. Nope, couldn't think of any, and the birds kept attacking. Birds attacking. An idea sparked at the base of my skull. I remembered a story my children, Austin and Kayla, had told me, back when I was at Camp Half-Blood. We were sitting at the campfire, and they'd been joking about Chiron's bad taste in music. They said that several years earlier, Percy Jackson had managed to drive off a flock of killer Stymphalian birds, simply by playing what Chiron had on his boombox. What had he played? What was Chiron's favourite? Valere! I screamed. Meg looked at me. A random geranium stuck in her hair. Who? It's a song Dean Martin covered, I said. It might be unacceptable to birds, I'm not sure. Well, be sure, Raina yelled. Ravens furiously scratched and pecked at her cloak, unable to tear the magical fabric. But her front side was unprotected. Every time she swung her sword, a bird swooped in, stabbing at her exposed chest and arms. Her long-sleeved tee was quickly turning into a short-sleeved tee. I channeled my worst king of cool. I imagined I was on a Las Vegas stage, a line of empty martini glasses on the piano behind me. I was wearing a velvet tuxedo. I had just smoked a pack of cigarettes. In front of me sat a crowd full of adoring, tone-deaf fans. Valere! I cried, modulating my voice to add about 20 syllables to the word, whoa! The response from the ravens was immediate. They recalled as if we'd suddenly become vegetarian entrees. Some threw themselves bodily against the metal girders, making the whole tower shudder. Keep going, Meg yelled. Phrased as an order, her words forced me to comply. With apologies to Domenico Modugno, who wrote the song, I gave Valere the full Dean Martin treatment. It had once been such a lovely, obscure little tune. Originally, Modugno called it Nel Blu, Dipinto di Blu, which granted was a bad title. I don't know why artists insist on doing that. Like the Wallflowers' One Headlight obviously should have been titled Me and Cinderella, and Ed Sheeran's The A-Team should clearly have been called Too Cold for Angels to Fly. I mean, come on guys, you're burying the lead. At any rate, Nel Blu Dipinto di Blu might have faded into obscurity had Dean Martin not got hold of it, repackaged it as Valere, added some 7,000 violins and backup singers, and turned it into a sleazy lounge singer classic. I don't have backup singers. All I had was my voice, but I did my best to be terrible. Even when I was a god and could speak any language I wanted, I'd never sung well in Italian. I kept mixing it up with Latin, so I came off sounding like Julius Caesar with a head cold. My newly busted nose just added to the awfulness. I bellowed and warbled, screwing my eyes shut and clinging to the ladder as ravens flapped around me, croaking in horror as my travesty of a performance. Far below, Raina's greyhounds bayed as if they'd lost their mother. I became so engrossed in murdering Valere that I didn't notice that the ravens had gone silent until Meg shouted, Apollo, enough! I faltered halfway through a chorus. When I opened my eyes, the ravens were nowhere in sight. From somewhere in the fog, their indignant caws grew fainter and fainter as the flock moved off in search of quieter, less revolting prey. My ears, Raina complained. Oh gods, my ears will never heal. The ravens will be back, I warned. My throat felt like the chute of a cement mixer. As soon as they manage to purchase enough raven-sized noise-cancelling headphones, they'll be back. Now climb. I don't have another Dean Martin song in me. Chapter 27. Let's play Guess the God. Starts with H. Wants to kill me. Besides my stepmom. As soon as I reached the catwalk, I gripped the rail. I wasn't sure if my legs were wobbly, or if the entire tower was swaying. Felt like I was back on Poseidon's pleasure terrene, the one pulled by blue whales. Oh, it's a smooth ride, he'd promised. You'll love it. Below, San Francisco stretched out in a rumpled quilt of green and grey, the edges frayed with fog. I felt a twinge of nostalgia for my days on the Sun Chariot. Oh, San Francisco. Whenever I saw that beautiful city below, I knew my day's journey was almost done. I could finally park my chariot at the Palace of the Sun, relax for the night, and let whatever forces that controlled night and day take over for me. Sorry, Hawaii, I love you, but I wasn't about to work overtime to give you a sunrise. The ravens were nowhere in sight. That didn't mean anything. A blanket of fog still obscured the top of the tower. The killers might swoop out of it at any minute. It wasn't fair that birds with 20-foot wingspans could sneak up on us so easily. At the far end of the catwalk sat the shipping container. The scent of roses was so strong now that even I could smell it, and it seemed to be coming from the box. I took a step forwards towards it and immediately stumbled. Careful! Raina grabbed my arm. A jolt of energy went through me, steadying my legs. Perhaps I imagined it, or maybe I was just shocked that she had made physical contact with me, and it hadn't involved placing her boot in my face. I'm okay, I said. One godly skill had not abandoned me. Lying. You need medical attention, Raina said. Your face is a horror show. Thanks. I've got supplies, Meg announced. She rummaged through the pouches of her gardening belt. I was terrified she might try to patch my face with flowering bougainvillea, but instead she pulled out tape, gauze and alcohol wipes. I supposed her time with Pranjal had taught her more than just how to use a cheese grater. She fussed over my face, then checked me and Raina for any especially deep cuts and punctures. We had plenty. Soon all three of us looked like refugees from George Washington's camp at Valley Forge. We could have spent the whole afternoon bandaging each other, but we didn't have that much time. Meg turned to regard the shipping container. She still had a stubborn geranium stuck in her hair. Her tattered dress rippled around her like shreds of seaweed. What is that thing? She wondered. What's it doing up here, and why does it smell like roses? Good questions. Judging scale and distance on the tower was difficult. Tucked against the girders, the shipping container looked close and small, but it was probably a full city block away from us, and larger than Marlon Brando's personal trailer on the set of The Godfather. Wow, where did that memory come from? Crazy times. Installing that huge red box on Sutro Tower would have been a massive undertaking. Then again, the triumvirate had enough cash to purchase 50 luxury yachts, so they could probably afford a few cargo helicopters. The bigger question was why? From the sides of the container, glimmering bronze and gold cables snaked outward, weaving around the pylon and crossbeams like grounding wires, connecting to satellite dishes, cellular arrays and power boxes. Was there some sort of monitoring station inside? The world's most expensive greenhouses for roses? Or perhaps the most elaborate scheme ever to steal premium cable TV channels? The closest end of the box was fitted with cargo doors, the vertical locking rods, laced with rows of heavy chains. Whatever was inside was meant to stay there. Any ideas? Raina asked. Try to get inside that container, I said. It's a terrible idea, but it's the only one I have. Yeah. Raina scanned the fog over our heads. Let's move before the ravens come back for an encore. Meg summoned her swords. She led the way across the catwalk, but after 20 feet or so, she stopped abruptly, as if she'd run into an invisible wall. She turned to face us. Guys, is me or feel weird? I thought the kick to my face might have short-circuited my brain. What, Meg? I said, wrong, like cold, and I glanced at Raina. Did you hear that? Only half of her words were coming through. Why aren't our voices affected? I studied the short expanse of catwalk separating us from Meg. An unpleasant suspicion wriggled in my head. Meg, take a step back towards me, please. Why? Want? Just humour me. She did. So are you guys feeling weird too? Like kind of cold? She frowned. Wait, it's better now. You were dropping words, Raina said. I was. The girls looked at me for an explanation. Sadly, I thought I might have one, or at least the beginnings of one. The metaphorical truck with the metaphorical headlights was getting closer to the metaphorically running me over. You two wait here for a second, I said. I want to try something. I took a few steps towards the shipping container. When I reached the spot where Meg had been standing, I felt the difference, as if I'd stepped across the threshold of a walk-in freezer. Another 10 feet, and I couldn't hear the wind anymore, or the pinging of metal cables against the sides of the tower, or the blood rushing in my ears. I snapped my fingers. No sound. Panic rose in my chest. Complete silence. And music God's worst nightmare. I faced Raina and Meg. I tried to shout. Can you hear me now? Nothing. My vocal cords vibrated, but the sound waves seemed to die before they left my mouth. Meg said something I couldn't hear. Raina spread her arms. I gestured for them to wait. Then I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep going towards the box. I stopped within an arm's length of the cargo doors. The rose bouquet smell was definitely coming from inside. The chains across the locking rods were heavy imperial gold, enough rare magical metal to buy a decent-sized palace on Mount Olympus. Even in my mortal form, I could feel the power radiating from the container, not just the heavy silence, but the cold, needling aura of wards and curses placed on the metal doors and walls, to keep us out, to keep something in. On the left-hand door, stencilled in white paint, was a single word in Arabic. My Arabic was even rustier than my Dean Martin Italian, but I was fairly sure it was the name of a city, Alexandria, as in Alexandria, Egypt. My knees almost buckled, my vision swam, I might have sobbed, though I couldn't hear it. Slowly gripping the rail for support, I staggered back to my friends. I only knew I'd left the zone of silence when I could hear myself muttering, "No, no, no, no." Meg caught me before I could fall over. "What's wrong? What's happened?" "I think I understand," I said. "The soundless god." "Who is it?" Raina asked. "I don't know." Raina blinked. "But you just said..." "I think I understand. Remembering who it is exactly, that's harder. I'm pretty sure we're dealing with a Ptolemaic god from back in the days when the Greeks ruled Egypt." Meg looked past me at the container. "So there's a god in the box." I shuddered, remembering the short-lived fast food franchise Hermes had once tried to open on Mount Olympus. Thankfully, God in the box never took off. "Yes, Meg, a very minor Egyptian-Greek hybrid god, I think, which is most likely why he couldn't be found in the Camp Jupiter archives." "If he's so minor," Raina said, "why do you look so scared?" A bit of my old Olympian haughtiness surged through me. Mortals, they could never understand. "Ptolemaic gods are awful," I said. "They're unpredictable, temperamental, dangerous, insecure." "Like a normal god then," Meg said. "I hate you," I said. "I thought you loved me." I'm multitasking. Roses were this god's symbol. I don't remember why. A connection to Venus? He was in charge of secrets. In the old days, if leaders hung a rose from the ceiling of a conference room, it meant everybody in that conversation was sworn to secrecy. They called it a sub rosa, under the rose. "So you know all that," Raina said, "but you don't know the god's name." He's... A frustrated growl rose from my throat. "I almost have it. I should have it, but I haven't thought about this god in millennia. He's very obscure. It's like asking me to remember the name of a particular backup singer I worked with during the Renaissance. Perhaps if you haven't kicked me in the head." "After that story about Coronis," Raina said, "you deserved it." "You did," Meg agreed. I sighed. You two are horrible influences on each other. Without taking their eyes off me, Raina and Meg gave each other a silent high five. "Fine," I grumbled. "Maybe the arrow of Dodona can help jog my memory. At least he insults me in flowery Shakespearean language." I drew the arrow from my quiver. "Oh, prophetic missile, I need your guidance." There was no answer. I wondered if the arrow had been lulled to sleep by the magic surrounding the storage container. Then I realised there was a simpler explanation. I returned the arrow to my quiver and pulled out a different one. "You chose the wrong arrow, didn't you?" Meg guessed. "No," I snapped. "You just don't understand my process. I'm going back into the sphere of silence now." "But..." I marched away before Meg could finish. Only when I was surrounded by cold silence again did it occur to me that it might be hard to carry on a conversation with the arrow if I couldn't talk. No matter, I was too proud to retreat. If the arrow and I couldn't communicate telepathically, I would just pretend to have an intelligent conversation while Raina and Meg looked on. "Oh, prophetic missile," I tried again. My vocal cords vibrated, though no sound came out. A disturbing sensation I can only compare to drowning. "I need your guidance." "Congratulations," said the arrow. Its voice resonated in my head, more tactile than audible, rattling my eyeballs. "Thanks," I said. "Wait, congratulations for what?" "Thou hast found thy groove, at least the beginnings of thy groove. I suspected this would be so, given time. Congratulations are merited." "Oh," I stared at the arrow's point, waiting for a but. None came. I was so surprised that I could only stutter, "Thanks? Thou art most welcome." "Did we just have a polite exchange?" "Aye," the arrow mused, "most troubling. By the way, what process wert thou speaking of to your maidens? Thou hast no process save fumbling." "Here we go," I muttered. "Please, my memory needs a jump start. This soundless god. He's that guy from Egypt, isn't he?" "Well reasoned, sirrah," the arrow said. "Thou hast narrowed it down to all the guys in Egypt." "You know what I mean? There was that one Ptolemaic god, the strange dude. He was a god of silence and secrets, but he wasn't exactly... If you can just give me his name, I think the rest of my memories will shake loose." "Is my wisdom so cheaply bought? Dost thou expect to win his name with no effort?" What do you call climbing such a tower? I demanded, getting slashed to pieces by ravens, kicked in the face and forced to sing like Dean Martin. Amusing. I may have yelled a few choice words, but the fear of silence censored them, so you will have to use your imagination. Fine, I said. Can you at least give me a hint? Verily, the name doth begin with an H. Hephaestus, Hermes, Hera. A lot of gods' names begin with H. Hera? Art thou serious? I'm just brainstorming. H, you say. Think of thy favourite physician. Me. Wait, my son, Asclepius. The arrow's sigh rattled my entire skeleton. Your favourite mortal physician? Dr. Kildare, Dr. Doom, Dr. House, Dr. Oh, you mean Hippocrates? But he's not a Ptolemaic god. Thou art killing me, the arrow complained. Hippocrates is thy hint. The name thou seekest is most like it. Thou needest change but 2 letters. Which 2? I felt petulant, but I'd never enjoyed word puzzles, even before my horrific experience in the burning maze. I shall give thee one last hint, said the arrow. Think of thy favourite Marx brother. The Marx Brothers? How do you even know about them? They were from the 1930s. I mean, yes, of course, I loved them. They brightened a dreary decade, but... Wait, the one who played the harp. Harpo! I always found his music sweet and sad and... The silence turned colder and heavier around me. Harpo, I thought. Hippocrates. But the names together. And you got... Harpocrates, I said. Arrow, please tell me that's not the answer. Please tell me he's not waiting in that box. The arrow did not reply, which I took as confirmation of my worst fears. I returned my Shakespearean friend to his quiver and trudged back to Raina and Meg. Meg frowned. I don't like that look on your face. Me neither, Raina said. What did you learn? I gazed out at the fog, wishing we could deal with something as easy as killer giant ravens. As I suspected, the name of the god had shaken loose my memories. Bad, unwelcome memories. I know which god we face, I said. The good news is, he's not very powerful as gods go. About as obscure as you can imagine. A real D-lister. Raina folded her arms. What's the catch? Well, I cleared my throat. Harpocrates and I didn't exactly get along. He might have sworn that someday he'd see me vaporized. Chapter 28. We all need a hand. On our shoulder sometimes, so we can chew through steel. Vaporized, said Raina. Yes. What did you do to him? Meg asked. I tried to look offended. Nothing. I may have teased him a bit, but he was a very minor god, rather silly looking. I may have made some jokes at his expense in front of other Olympians. Raina knitted her eyebrows. So you bullied him? No, I mean, I did write Zap me in glowing letters on the back of his toga, and I suppose I might have been a bit harsh when I tied him up and locked him in the stalls with my fiery horses overnight. Oh my gods, Meg said. You're awful. I fought down the urge to defend myself. I wanted to shout, well, at least I didn't kill him like I did my pregnant girlfriend Coronis, but that wasn't much of a gotcha. Looking back on my encounters with Harpocrates, I realised I had been awful. If somebody had treated me, Lester, the way I treated that puny Ptolemaic god, I would have wanted to crawl into a hole and die. And if I were honest, even back when I was a god, I had been bullied. Only the bully had been my father, and I should have known better than to share the pain. I hadn't thought about Harpocrates in eons. Teasing him had seemed like a no big deal. I suppose that's what made it even worse. I'd shrugged off our encounters. I doubted he had. Coronos's ravens. Harpocrates. It was no coincidence. They were both haunting me today like the ghosts of Saturnalia past. Tarquin had orchestrated all this with me in mind. He was forcing me to confront some of my greatest hits of dreadfulness. Even if I survived the challenges, my friends would see exactly what kind of dirtbag I was. The shame would weigh me down and make me ineffective, the same way Tarquin used to add rocks to a cage around his enemy's head, until eventually the burden was too much. The prisoner would collapse and drown in a shallow pool, and Tarquin could claim, I didn't kill him, he just wasn't strong enough. I took a deep breath. All right, I was a bully. I see that now. I will march right into that box and apologise, and then hope Harpocrates doesn't vaporise me. Raina did not look thrilled. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing a simple black watch on her wrist. She checked the time, perhaps wondering how long it would take to get me vaporised and then get back to camp. Assuming we can get through those doors, she said, what are we up against? Tell me about Harpocrates. I tried to summon a mental image of the god. He usually looks like a child, perhaps 10 years old. You bullied a 10-year-old, Meg grumbled. He looks 10. I didn't say he was 10. He has a shaved head except for a ponytail on one side. Is that an Egyptian thing? Raina asked. Yes, for children. Harpocrates was originally an incarnation of the god Horus, Harpocruti, Horus the child. Anyway, when Alexander the Great invaded Egypt, the Greeks found all these statues of the god and didn't know what to make of him. He was usually depicted with his finger to his lips. I demonstrated. Like, be quiet, Meg said. That's exactly what the Greeks thought. The gesture had nothing to do with shh. It symbolized the hieroglyph for child. Nevertheless, the Greeks decided he must be the god of silence and secrets. They changed his name to Harpocrates. They built some shrines, started worshipping him, and boom, he's a Greek-Egyptian hybrid god. Meg snorted. It can't be that easy to make a new god. Never underestimate the power of thousands of human minds all believing the same thing. They can remake reality, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. Raina peered at the doors, and now Harpocrates is in there. You think he's powerful enough to cause all our communications failures? He shouldn't be. I don't understand how. Those cables, Meg pointed. They're connecting the box to the tower. Could they be boosting his signal somehow? Maybe that's why he's up here. Raina nodded appreciatively. Meg, next time I need to set up a gaming console, I'm calling you. Maybe we could just cut the cables and not open the box. I loved that idea, which was a pretty good indication it wouldn't work. It won't be enough, I decided. The daughter of Bellona has to open the door to the soundless god, right? And for our ritual summoning to work, we need the last breath of the god after his, soul is cut free. Talking about the Sibylline recipe in the safety of the praetor's office had been one thing. Talking about it on Sutro Tower, facing the god's big red shipping container, was quite another. I felt a deep sense of unease that had nothing to do with the cold, or the proximity to the sphere of silence, or even the zombie poison circulating in my blood. A few moments ago, I had admitted to bullying Harpocrates. I had decided to apologise. Then what? I would kill him for the sake of a prophecy? Another rock plopped into the invisible cage around my head. Meg must have felt the same. She made her best "I don't want to" scowl and started fidgeting with the tatters of her dress. We don't really have to, do we? I mean, even if this Harpo guy is working for the Emperors. I don't think he is. Raina nodded towards the chains on the locking rods. It looks like he's being kept in. He's a prisoner. That's even worse, Meg said. From where I stood, I could just make out the white stenciled Arabic for Alexandria on the door of the container. I imagined the triumvirate digging up Harpocrates from some buried temple in the Egyptian desert, wrestling him into that box, then shipping him off to America like third-class freight. The emperors would have considered Harpocrates just another dangerous, amusing plaything, like their trained monsters and humanoid lackeys. And why not let King Tarquin be his custodian? The emperors could ally themselves with the undead tyrant, at least temporarily, to make their invasion of Camp Jupiter a little easier. They could let Tarquin arrange his cruelest trap for me. Whether I killed Harpocrates or he killed me, what did it matter to the triumvirate in the end? Either way, they would find it entertaining. One more gladiator match to break the monotony of their immortal lives. Pain flared from the stab wound in my neck. I realised I'd been clenching my jaw in anger. There has to be another way, I said. The prophecy can't mean for us to kill Harpocrates. Let's talk to him, figure something out. How can we? Raina asked. If he radiates silence? That's a good question, I admitted. First things first, we have to get those doors open. Can you two cut the chains? Meg looked scandalised. With my swords? Well, I thought they would work better than your teeth, but you tell me. Guys, said Raina, Imperial gold blades hacking away at Imperial gold chains. Maybe we could cut through, but we'd be here all nightfall. We don't have that kind of time. I've got another idea. Godly strength. She looked at me. But I don't have any, I protested. You got your archery skills back, she said. You got your musical skills back. That Valerie song didn't count, Meg said. Voler, I corrected. The point is, Raina continued, I may be able to boost your strength. I think that might be why I'm here. I thought about the jolt of energy I'd felt when Raina touched my arm. It hadn't been physical attraction or a warning buzz from Venus. I recalled something she had told Frank before we left camp. Bellona's power, I said. It has something to do with strength in numbers? Raina nodded. I can amplify other people's abilities. The bigger the group, the better it works. But even with 3 people, it might be sufficient to enhance your power enough to rip open those doors. Would that count? Meg asked. I mean, if Raina doesn't open the door herself, isn't that cheating the prophecy? Raina shrugged. Prophecies never mean what you think, right? If Apollo is able to open the door thanks to my help, I'm still responsible, wouldn't you say? Besides, I pointed to the horizon. Hours of daylight remained, but the full moon was rising, enormous and white, over the hills of Marin County. Soon enough, it would turn blood red, and so, I feared, would a whole lot of our friends. We're running out of time. If we can cheat, let's cheat. I realised those would make terrible final words. Nevertheless, Raina and Meg followed me into the cold silence. When we reached the doors, Raina took Meg's hand. She turned to me. Ready? Then she planted her other hand on my shoulder. Strength surged through me. I laughed with soundless joy. I felt as potent as I had in the woods at Camp Half-Blood when I tossed one of Nero's barbarian bodyguards into low Earth orbit. Raina's power was awesome. If I could just get her to follow me around the whole time I was mortal, her hand on my shoulder, a chain of 20 or 30 other demigods behind her, I bet there was nothing I couldn't accomplish. I grabbed the uppermost chains and tore them like crepe paper, then the next set and the next. The imperial gold broke and crumpled noiselessly in my fists. The steel locking rods felt as soft as breadsticks as I pulled them out of their fittings. Then that left only the door handles. The power may have gone to my head. I glanced back at Raina and Meg with a self-satisfied smirk, ready to accept their silent adulation. Instead, they looked as if I'd bent them in half too. Meg swayed, her complexion lima bean green. The skin around Raina's eyes was tight with pain. The veins on her temples stood out like lightning bolts. My energy surge was frying them. Finish it, Raina mouthed. Her eyes added a silent plea. Before we pass out? Humbled and ashamed, I grabbed the door handles. My friends had got me this far. If Harpocrates was indeed waiting inside this shipping box, I would make sure the full force of his anger fell on me, not Raina or Meg. I yanked open the doors and stepped inside. Chapter 29. Ever heard the phrase, the silence is deafening? Yeah, that's a real thing. Immediately I crumpled to my hands and knees under the weight of the other god's power. Silence enfolded me like liquid titanium. The cloying smell of roses was overwhelming. I'd forgotten how Harpocrates communicated, with blasts of mental images, oppressive and devoid of sound. Back when I was a god, I found this annoying. Now as a human, I realized it could pulp my brain. At the moment, he was sending me one continuous message. You hate. Behind me, Raina was on her knees, cupping her ears and screaming mutely. Meg was curled on her side, kicking her legs as if trying to throw off the heaviest of blankets. A moment before, I'd been tearing through metal like it was paper. Now I could barely lift my head to meet Harpocrates' gaze. The god floated cross-legged at the far end of the room. He was still the size of a 10-year-old child, still wearing his ridiculous toga and pharaonic bowling pin crown combo, like so many confused Ptolemaic gods who couldn't decide if they were Egyptian or Greco-Roman. His braided ponytail snaked down one side of his shaved head, and of course he still held one finger to his mouth, like the most frustrated, burned-out librarian in the world. Shh! He could not do otherwise. I recalled that Harpocrates required all his willpower to lower his finger from his mouth. As soon as he stopped concentrating, his hand would pop right back into position. In the old days, I'd found that hilarious. Now, not so much. The centuries had not been kind to him. His skin was wrinkled and saggy. His once bronze complexion was an unhealthy porcelain colour. His sunken eyes smouldered with anger and self-pity. Imperial gold fetters were clamped around Harpocrates' wrists and ankles, connecting him to a web of chains, cords and cables. Some hooked up to elaborate control panels, others channeled through holes in the walls of the container, leading out to the tower's superstructure. The setup seemed designed to siphon Harpocrates' power and then amplify it, to broadcast his magical silence across the world. This was the source of all our communications troubles. One sad, angry, forgotten little god. It took me a moment to understand why he remained imprisoned. Even drained of his power, a minor deity should have been able to break a few chains. Harpocrates seemed to be alone and unguarded. Then I noticed them, floating on either side of the god, so entangled in chains that they were hard to distinguish from the general chaos of machinery and wires, were two objects I hadn't seen in centuries. Identical ceremonial axes, each about 4 feet tall, with a crescent blade and a thick bundle of wooden rods fastened around the shaft. Fasces, the ultimate symbol of Roman might. Looking at them made my ribs twist into bows. In the old days, powerful Roman officials never left home without a procession of lictor bodyguards, each carrying one of those bundled axes to let the commoners know somebody important was coming through. The more fascist, the more important the official. In the 20th century, Benito Mussolini revived the symbol when he became Italy's dictator. His ruling philosophy was named after those bundled axes, fascism. But the fasces in front of me were no ordinary standards. These blades were imperial gold. Wrapped around the bundles of rods were silken banners embroidered with the names of their owners. Enough of the letters were visible that I could guess what they said. On the left, Caesar, Marcus Aurelius Commodus, Antonius Augustus. On the right, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, otherwise known as Caligula. These were the personal fasces of the two emperors, being used to drain Harpocrates' power and keep him enslaved. The god glared at me. He forced painful images into my mind. Me stuffing his head into a toilet on Mount Olympus. Me howling with amusement as I tied his wrists and ankles and shut him in the stables with my fire-breathing horses. Dozens of other encounters I'd completely forgotten about. And in all of them, I was as golden, handsome and powerful as any triumvirate emperor. And just as cruel. My skull throbbed from the pressure of Harpocrates' assault. I felt capillaries bursting in my busted nose, my forehead, my ears. Behind me, Raina and Meg writhed in agony. Raina locked eyes with me, blood trickling from her nostrils. She seemed to ask, "Well, genius, what now?" I crawled closer to Harpocrates. Tentatively using a series of mental pictures, I tried to convey a question. How did you get here? I imagined Caligula and Commodus overpowering him, binding him, forcing him to do their bidding. I imagined Harpocrates floating alone in the dark box for months, years, unable to break free from the power of the fascists, growing weaker and weaker as the emperors used his silence to keep the demigod camps in the dark, cut off from one another, while the triumvirate divided and conquered. Harpocrates was their prisoner, not their ally. Was I right? Harpocrates replied with a withering gust of resentment. I took that to mean both yes and you suck, Apollo. He forced more visions into my mind. I saw Commodus and Caligula standing where I now was, smiling cruelly, taunting him. You should be on our side, Caligula told him telepathically. You should want to help us. Harpocrates had refused. Perhaps he couldn't overpower his bullies, but he intended to fight them with every last bit of his soul. That's why he now looked so withered. I sent out a pulse of sympathy and regret. Harpocrates blasted it away with scorn. Just because we both hated the triumvirate did not make us friends. Harpocrates had never forgotten my cruelty. If he hadn't been constrained by the fascists, he would have already blasted me and my friends into a fine mist of atoms. He showed me that image in vivid colour. I could tell he relished thinking about it. Meg tried to join our telepathic argument. At first, all she could send was a garbled sense of pain and confusion. Then she managed to focus. I saw her father smiling down at her, handing her a rose. For her, the rose was a symbol of love, not secrets. Then I saw her father dead on the steps of Grand Central Station, murdered by Nero. She sent Harpocrates her life story, captured in a few painful snapshots. She knew about monsters. She had been raised by the beast. No matter how much Harpocrates hated me, and Meg agreed that I could be pretty stupid sometimes, we had to work together to stop the triumvirate. Harpocrates shredded her thoughts with rage. How dare she presume to understand his misery? Raina tried a different approach. She shared her memories of Tarquin's last attack on Camp Jupiter. So many wounded and killed, their bodies dragged off by ghouls to be reanimated by Vicolacae. She showed Harpocrates her greatest fear, that after all their battles, after centuries of upholding the best traditions of Rome, the 12th Legion might face their end tonight. Harpocrates was unmoved. He bent his will towards me, burying me in hatred. All right, I pleaded, kill me if you must, but I am sorry. I have changed. I sent him a flurry of the most horrible, embarrassing failures I had suffered since becoming mortal, grieving over the body of Heloise, the griffin at the way station, holding the dying Pandos crest in my arms in the burning maze, and of course watching helplessly as Caligula murdered Jason Grace. Just for a moment, Harpocrates' wrath wavered. At the very least, I had managed to surprise him. He had not been expecting regret or shame from me. Those weren't my trademark emotions. If you let us destroy the fascists, I thought, that will free you. It would also hurt the emperors, yes? I showed him a vision of Raina and Meg, cutting through their fascists with their swords, the ceremonial axes exploding. Yes, Harpocrates fought back, and adding a brilliant red tint to the vision. I had offered him something he wanted. Raina chimed in. She pictured Commodus and Caligula on their knees, groaning in pain. The fascists were connected to them. They'd taken a great risk leaving their axes here. If the fascists were destroyed, the emperors might be weakened and vulnerable before the battle. Yes, Harpocrates replied. The pressure of the silence eased. I could almost breathe without agony again. Raina staggered to her feet. She helped Meg and me to stand. Unfortunately, we were not out of danger. I imagined any number of terrible things Harpocrates could do to us if we freed him, and since I'd been talking with my mind, I couldn't help but broadcast those fears. Harpocrates' glare did nothing to reassure me. The emperors must have anticipated this. They were smart, cynical, horribly logical. They knew that if I did release Harpocrates, the gods' first act would probably be to kill me. For the emperors, the potential loss of their fascists apparently didn't outweigh the potential benefit of having me destroyed, or the entertainment value of knowing I'd done it to myself. Raina touched my shoulder, making me flinch involuntarily. She and Meg had drawn their weapons. They were waiting for me to decide. Did I really want to risk this? I studied the soundless god. Do what you want with me, I thought to him. Just spare my friends, please. His eyes burned with malice, but also a hint of glee. He seemed to be waiting for me to realise something, as if he'd written "Zap me" on my backpack when I wasn't looking. Then I saw what he was holding in his lap. I hadn't noticed it while I was down on my knees and hands, but now that I was standing, it was hard to miss. A glass jar, apparently empty, sealed with a metal lid. I felt as if Tarquin had just dropped the final rock into the drowning cage around my head. I imagined the emperors howling with delight on the deck of Caligula's yacht. Rumours from centuries before swirled in my head. The Sibyl's body had crumbled away. She could not die. Her attendants kept her life force, her voice, in a glass jar. Harpocrates cradled all that remained of the Sibyl of Cumae, another person who had every reason to hate me, a person the emperors and Tarquin knew I would feel obliged to help. They had left me the starkest of choices: run away, let the triumvirate win, and watch my mortal friends be destroyed, or free two bitter enemies and face the same fate as Jason Grace. It was an easy decision. I turned to Rayner and Meg and thought as clearly as I could: destroy the fascists. Cut him free.